Hey guys, what's up? I'm Joel, and this is 928 OBS, and today we're gonna rebuild our turbo. So I had already started this video, but two things happened. One, I kind of messed up the turbo, and I'll show you why later. And the other one was that I actually lost all the footage that I had recorded. So I already sort of started this, but I'll talk to you and I'll show you what I did to get where I'm at. So anyways, let me show you where I'm at. Okay, so as you can see, we have the compressor housing separated from the rest of the turbo. And if I can get this thing. And we have the backing plate off of the compressor housing and our compressor wheel. So basically what you gotta do to get to this point is so the first thing you wanna do when you go to take off your housing from the turbo is before you even take it off, you wanna make sure that you mark the housing to the backing plate. So you can see I have a mark right there. And then the backing plate to the bearing, to the bearing housing, which I have it marked right there. You can hardly see it, but it's marked. And you also want to mark your bearing housing to your compressor wheel, to your turbine housing, if you're gonna be keeping that. But once you have everything marked for reference to put back together, what you want to do is you're gonna go to your compressor housing, and you have 4 bolts, and they're 8mm 12 point. So you're gonna take those 4 out. You're gonna take off this other bolt that's gonna be right here. I believe this one's a 10mm. Yeah, so you're gonna take off this 10mm, and what that does is that one holds the harness for the EVPV. Take that off, and then you're gonna have to work this off of the backing plate. The backing plate will most likely have some sort of gasket maker or an O-ring, or even if it doesn't have anything, it's tied on there, so you gotta work it loose. You want to make sure that you don't damage your housing or your backing plate, and that comes right off. And the next thing you'll do is remove your compressor wheel from the shaft, and to do that you're gonna need 18mm socket or wrench and a 16mm socket or wrench. The 16mm will go on the compressor side. The 18mm will go on the turbine side. And once you break it loose, it'll basically just screw off, and that will come out right pretty easy. Once you have that out, you're gonna have 4 more 8mm bolts. Break those loose, and then your backing plate will just slide out of your bearing housing. And that's pretty much all you need to get to the point that I'm at right now. This is where I started to run into problems. So what happened was that well, first of all, when I took all this off, I noticed that one of the bolts was actually completely loose. And when I took the backing plate for the compressor housing, what happened is that bolt just came out, which, I mean, kind of explains why I wasn't making that much boost. I was only making between 10 and maybe 13 pounds of boost on this thing, so it was just pretty much nothing. So that came out, and after that came out, I started taking the rest of the bolts out, and this came out pretty easy. Then I got to that one and I broke it, and you can see it's still in there. So I broke the head off of that one because it was completely seized in there. And keep in mind, I soaked this thing in a liquid wrench, and the other one came out just fine. So took that off, and I wanted to try and get the bearing housing from the turbine housing, and I beat on it. I did everything I could to take it off, and it was just not coming off. That thing is stuck on there like permanently. And I tried everything that I could, short of putting heat to this thing, because I don't have a torch or anything to put heat to it. But I ended up hitting it so much that I don't know if you can tell, but I actually broke the bearing housing, which at that point I was pretty bummed out, because I already have the rebuild kit. I have the compressor wheel, I have the turbine housing, and I actually ended up buying another part that I'm going to show you here in a second. So I have quite a bit of money already invested into this turbo, and I don't want to, because I thought I was like, oh great, I should have just gone to another turbo, a bigger turbo, or like a KC TP38R for this thing, which would have been pretty cool, but that thing's like $1,500. But that was the first thing that came to my mind. But I was like, well, you know what? I think I can find that housing. So I started looking for it online, and it took me a little bit to find it, but I did end up finding it, thankfully. And it wasn't that bad. It was actually, it was 70 bucks, which, I mean, it is kind of pricey, but it's better than buying a whole new turbo or, you know, having to go and look for it. I got this off of eBay, and I'll leave a link. I always like to leave links for everything that I buy down in the description. So if you don't see it there, leave me a comment and I'll find the link and I'll give it to you. I'll post it on there. But anyways, I found this on eBay, 70 bucks, 2-day shipping, and I just got this in today. So now we can finally finish this thing. So I'm actually not gonna need any of this anymore because I have a turbine housing. Now I have this new too, and I have a new turbine wheel that I'm gonna be showing you here pretty soon. I mean, I'm actually pretty excited about that. So like I said, we're gonna completely get rid of all of this stuff. But yeah, anyways, let's get this thing out of here because like I said, we're not really gonna need it anymore, and we definitely do need the space here. So let me go ahead and get all of these things out of the way. Okay, so the first thing that I want to show you is the new turbine wheel that I got. And like pretty much everything else that we have gotten so far, except for the turbine housing, is from the guys over at KC Turbos. Now this thing's really well packaged. So again, like I said, it's from the guy over at KC Turbos. And this is actually a pretty new product. I had a guy here leave a comment telling me to grab one of these things, and when I went and looked at the website, it wasn't there yet. And I looked on the website last week, right before I started rebuilding the turbo, and saw that it was already on there. So I went ahead and bought it. So anyways, let's tear this thing open and see what's inside. Here we go. And these things are heavy. Okay, so now what this is a obviously a turbine wheel, but what makes it special and why I'm pretty excited about it is that it's actually a new turbine wheel from KC Turbos, and it's what they call I believe like a hybrid wheel. This is pretty much what this is a S300 SXE turbine wheel that's been made to fit the TP38 turbo. So it's reverse rotation, is just a drop-in turbine wheel for our turbos. That's pretty much leaps ahead of what we had. It's I wish I could show you the one from my turbo, but it's pretty much stuck in my turbine housing and I can't get it out. But it's a little bit taller than this. I might throw in a picture so you can see the comparison between them and see what they look like. But this is taller and it has a different fin design. So basically what this is going to do is going to give you lower your UGTs, give you better spool up, more power, obviously. And I'm actually really excited to throw this in there because, like I said, I really want to build this turbo. The whole truck, I want to build it to where it works really good down low, all the way up to, you know, to mid. I don't really ever kind of crank this thing up a lot. So I think this is really going to fit with what I'm trying to do with my truck. So now that I showed you pretty much all the new parts, oh, this is the new bearing housing that I got off of eBay. And it looks identical to the one that I already had. So I'm pretty sure it'll fit, no problems, and it'll probably be a lot better than what we had. So anyways, let's get going with this thing. So now that we have all the parts that we need to continue, we have our shaft and turbine wheel and the rebuild kit from KC Turbos, along with the new bearing housing, we can go ahead and start rebuilding this thing. So the first thing we gotta do is we gotta grab the oil seal, and that's gonna go on your shaft by the turbine housing on this groove right there. You want to make sure you keep all this stuff really well lubed. So we're gonna go ahead and put a little bit of oil on the shaft. Get that all lubed, and then you're gonna put some on the seal. We're gonna go ahead and slide it. And there we go. There's the first one. Okay, so this is the cap that's gonna go on your bearing housing, and this thing was a pain. I actually didn't realize that we needed this piece. I know it even existed because this piece gets sandwiched between your bearing housing and the turbine housing. So I had no idea you needed it. So when I went ahead to rebuild that thing, reinstall it, I noticed on the instructions that I needed this piece. So anyways, this thing was pretty much, well, first of all, it was a pain to get the bearing housing off the turbine wheel, but we got it off. We drilled that bolt that we broke in there. We drilled it out. We beat the heck out of it with the hammer, and we finally broke it loose. And then this thing itself was another pain to get out because it was just coated with that buildup. And I don't know if you can see, but this thing had so much oil in it. Like, that's just oil built up in there. And that was what was holding this thing, the whole bearing housing on the turbine housing. It just would not come out. But we finally got it out, and now I can show you the difference between the stock OBS turbine wheel and KC's new SXE wheel. So as you can see right there, the SXE wheel is much taller, much bigger, and should catch a lot more air than this old turbine wheel. So anyways, now that we got all the parts that we actually need, let's keep going with this thing. Also, make sure that you clean the heck out of this housing before you put it back on the turbo. You want to make sure that you get all that built up oil out of there, nice and clean. And look at that side. You want to make sure you get all of this stuff cleaned up. Get in the bore in the hole as much as you can. Clean that out. And just, you want to make sure that everything on this thing is clean before you throw it back in your turbo. So we have our bearing housing with the cap already on it. And let me tell you what, this cap was a pain to get out of the old bearing housing. And we also have our new turbine wheel. So now the turbine wheel, like you saw in one of the last clips, already has the oil seal installed on it. And now we're just gonna put a little bit more oil on the shaft. Make sure it's all nice and lubed so it won't have any problem sliding in the bearing housing. And make sure you put some pressure on it and that it seats. You gotta make sure that oil seal seats in the bearing housing. So now what we gotta do is we gotta take some of these bearings out of the kit. If I can get them out. All right, there we go. So here we have one of them. We are gonna cover it in oil, make sure it's nice and lubed, and slide it down in the housing. And then we're gonna take the spacer. Again, make sure it's nice and lubed, and slide it into the housing. And you're gonna get your last bushing over here. Repeat the process. coated in oil. Might have been a little too much, but it's better to have more lube than not have enough. And there you go. Make sure that the turbine wheel spins freely, which that one does, as you can see. And now we can continue with the rest of the kit. Okay, so the next step's actually gonna be dropping the turbine into its housing. So you wanna make sure that you grab a hold of the shaft so that the seal doesn't come unseated. And there we go. It's nicely in there. So now that we have our bearing housing and our turbine housing all put together, now we can throw some bolts in it. But before you throw the bolts in it, you wanna make sure that you get some Loctite on the bolts. You can either use blue Loctite or red Loctite. Red Loctite is pretty much welding those things in there. Blue is, they won't vibrate out. So I chose to go with blue because if you ever want to service the turbo again and you gotta take it apart for whatever reason, with blue Loctite, you'll still be able to take them out. With red, you'll be lucky if you ever get them back out again. So we'll use a little bit of blue Loctite on these. Should be enough. We'll drop them in there. So make sure that you install your seal on your bearing housing, and get a little bit of oil on it again. Make sure you're using clean new motor oil, and make sure that everything's well coated with oil again, and just make sure that it seats properly in its groove. Make sure that it's not twisted or anything. Make sure that it's flat all the way around. Okay, so now the next step's gonna be putting your thrust bearings and thrust washer on the compressor backing plate. So the first part you're gonna put on is the bearing, and that basically is this part that looks like this. And on the bearing, it's gonna take another oil seal, the smaller one. You're gonna slip that on there, make sure it clips on the little groove. With the seal facing down towards the backing plate, you're gonna press it in there, make sure it snaps in there, and make sure it rotates freely in there. So that looks pretty good. And then you're gonna grab your thrust washer. Now, if you got the 360, which I really do recommend you do, the new part where the cutout used to be is gonna be facing up, away from the square flat part on the backing plate. So that part's gonna be on. Now the next part that you gotta put in will be this other. Let me see if we can get it back out. There we go. So it's gonna be basically this washer looking thing, and on this, the flat part is gonna be going down towards your bearing housing. So now with that on, you can go ahead and install the backing plate. So now, if you can see on the front side of it, you have a little arrow rectangle thing and a circle. The circle on the back goes along with the flat part of the backing plate. Now these two will be facing up towards the round part of the bearing housing. So if we turn this on the side like this, we'll slide it in with the flat part facing up. Grabbing a hold of your thrust washer, again with the flat part facing up on the round side of the bearing housing, not the flat part, the round part. We're gonna slide it on. We're gonna slide it onto the shaft. And again, make sure that the shaft and everything's really well lubricated. And there we go. Now we're just gonna make sure we're on the right spot and go ahead and drop our bolts in there. Okay, at this point, we're pretty much done with this thing. All we gotta do is throw our compressor wheel on there, throw our housing, and we'll be done with this thing. And talking about the wheel, this is a real quick comparison between the new KC Turbos compressor wheel and the stock OBS wheel. As you can see, the KC wheel has a much aggressive looking design to it than the stock OBS wheel, and it's just way better looking. So anyways, we're gonna throw this on there. So I ran into another little problem. The actual wheel that KC Turbo sent me was actually, well, not the wheel was you know, fine. The part that was wrong was the shaft. It's actually a little bit too long, and let me show you. So here I have the three wheels. This is obviously the original one. This is the one that they first sent me, and this is the one that the actual right one. And I don't know if you can tell, it's kind of hard, but the one they sent me is a little bit too long. So it was sitting too high and wasn't letting the compressor wheel sit down all the way up against the vacuum plate. And it's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. All the companies do, and they made it up pretty cool. Let me show you. They sent us some pretty cool stickers, and they sent us a free t-shirt, so it's pretty cool. I mean, it does suck that we had to wait a few more days to finish the project, but the truck's not going anywhere, and like I said, everybody makes mistakes, so you can't get mad at someone for making one mistake. And like I said, they made up for it, so I'm not mad, and I'm still really happy with all of their products. So anyways, I'm gonna throw this stuff back together because I had to tear it all apart to take the turbine wheel out, and I'll put it all back together and we'll be done with this thing. So this thing is back together, and the last few things that I did was I threw the compressor wheel on and torqued it to 10 foot-pounds. Well, I threw the backing plate on, and I already showed you how to orientate that washer with the new flat spot facing away from the little rectangle. And you're gonna drop the backing plate in, just like I said, and then you're gonna drop the 4 bolts. They go in there, and those get torqued to 12 foot-pounds. And then you drop in your compressor wheel. Your compressor wheel gets torqued to 10 foot-pounds. And then you realign your compressor housing with the marks that you had made before, which can't find mine anymore. Right there. So you realign your compressor housing with the marks that you had already done. And you put the new O-ring on it, and I also put some high temp RTV all the way around it, just a little bit. You don't want to put on too much. And drop in your bolts and torque those to 12 foot-pounds. That is it. We are done, and look at that thing. That is in there. Awesome. I can't wait to put this thing in the truck. And it wasn't, how can I say this? It wasn't that bad if nothing would have gone wrong, but I feel like everything went wrong, and it made this thing a complete pain in the butt. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to make rebuild one of these turbos again, because I hate 7.3 turbos. So far, it has been the worst thing to work on this truck. It's just absolutely sucks. But other than that, like, the whole putting it together process and taking it apart wasn't that bad. Other than the bearing housing that gave me a bunch of trouble. But all that said and done, I'm super happy with this thing. I'm really excited to throw it back in the truck. And at the same time, I'm not that excited because I know it's going to be a pain in the ass to get it back in there. But it's the last final step that we have to finishing this thing. And I would do it right now, but this thing already went way too long, and I want to get some rest. But anyways, this thing just looks awesome. The wheels in there. Let's see if I can handle it with one hand. turbine wheel is in there. Everything spins nice and freely. No noises or anything. And the last thing you want to do before you put it in the truck is obviously fill it turbo with oil. You want to make sure that it's pre-lubed before you get it in there. It doesn't have to be full of oil, because when you turn it upside down, it's gonna drain back into the truck. But you do want to make sure that there's some oil in there. You don't want to start this thing dry. Now with KC Turbos, I'm actually super happy with them, even though there was that little problem of me not getting the right turbine wheel. They took care of it. They took care of me. And like I said, I think they're a great company, and I'm super excited to try out their products. I think it's gonna perform great, better than ever. And I'm this close to getting this thing back together. The goal is to have it back running this weekend. But anyways, that is gonna be it for this video, guys. Give it a like, leave a comment if you have any questions at all with the whole process. If you have any questions at all with the whole process, leave a comment down below, and I'll do my best to answer them. And subscribe if you haven't. We are this close to 1,000, so I'm super excited. Anyways, I'll see you on the next one.